Hello and welcome once again to the Slate Breakdown Week 6. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Danny Carter at CD Carter 13. And, of course, we're breaking down from your write-up here each of the games from this week. Obviously, we had the game last night where we talked for a minute before the show about how Devontae Freeman just... You said you went to bed and he had, 6 points?
Yeah.
And you wake up to him having his normal 30-plus points as he does every week.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking... can you not play him from here on out? I don't know. I think that he's as reliable. I know it sounds strange with Julio Jones on the Falcons, but Devontae Freeman is the centerpiece of that offense. He may not be good or great, but he is the centerpiece. Like, everything seems to revolve around him and getting him touches and getting him touches in critical situations. Yeah, I mean, the doubters are silenced.
Yeah, and I will be admittedly one of those people that I no longer, but I would definitely was. And I mean, it seems like just the target numbers that he sees each week itself kind of give him a really nice high floor. And I mean, we'll see the next time he doesn't score multiple touchdowns. Maybe that's never going to happen again. Who knows?
It's incredible right now. Yeah.
Yeah, he's on a hell of a run. So starting off with the Sunday games, the Bills and the Bengals, and Tyrod Taylor here is trying to play. We heard originally he's going to be out for a couple weeks, so. Kind of an uncertain situation there. We may end up seeing E.J. Manuel. And as you pointed out here, all of a sudden Gio Bernard is the running back for the Bengals that you would be looking at if you're playing one of them in DFS, because Jeremy Hill just has not looked good. I mean, he had 3 touchdowns in the game a couple weeks ago, but that wasn't a product of him running well. That was a product of the Bengals being inside the 5-yard line multiple times.
Yeah, for people, congratulations if you played Gio Bernard last week, and in a few weeks this year, I wrote in the article that Bernard has approached or eclipsed 70% of Cincinnati's offensive snaps 3 times, and that's significant. I mean, this is not in those games. It wasn't really a timeshare. It was just Gio Bernard over and over again. Teams have attacked the Bills, rightfully so, through the air. This year, their defense is not great, but their front seven is where their strength is. So that secondary can be exploited, and so I expect another Gio game here against the Bills.
Yeah, and I mean, he, like you said, he's looked very good, and he wasn't a guy that was on many radars. And I mean, I'm a Bengals fan, that he wasn't really on my radar, so
right.
He's definitely showing up. And then, of course, like you mentioned, the Bengals attacking through the air. Andy Dalton, once again, I mean, he's got the 3rd best passer rating in the league, and I was one of the many that didn't want to believe that he had suddenly turned it around. But I mean, with all of his weapons finally healthy, it's hard not to do it. And I saw a stat, I think it was Rich Hribar, I think is how you say his name, tweeted out that Dalton has been top 12 every single week and better than in top 10 all but 1 week, and yet AJ Green's only been in the top 10 once. So Dalton's having a tremendous season even without AJ Green. So outside of course, Gio Bernard, is there any one Bengals wide receiver, tight end you're going to look at, or are you kind of worried about the ball being spread around?
I think that Tyler Eifert has established himself as reliable a tight end, not named Gronk, in fantasy football. Eifert against the Seahawks last week caught 2 touchdowns, was targeted I think 11 times, which is tremendous for a tight end. The Bills are not a great matchup for tight ends, but I can't deny that Eifert is a safe, high floor cash game play. The 1 week he scored 0. He actually caught the ball near the goal line, dove into the end zone. It appeared to be a touchdown. It was called back. So without that, I think that he actually is the tight end 1 in all of fantasy football. If that goes the other way, he's very reliable.
Yeah, it seems like that was one of those subjective rules. That was that rule that week with the NFL. Maybe the next week it wasn't. But
right.
And on the Buffalo side, it's going to be tough because we don't know who's playing quarterback. We don't even really know who the running back's going to be officially. It seems like the only thing we know is it probably won't be LaShawn McCoy. But Carlos Williams, I'm still kind of holding out hope that he ends up clearing concussion protocol and can play this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to go in on any Buffalo player if E.J. Manuel is behind center. I talked about in the article, I would fire up Cincinnati's defense for sure if Manuel starts. His completions percentage is atrocious, and that's a key factor in which defense we decided to go with. I don't think Charles Clay is a play here anymore. No Buffalo receiver is a viable play. It's just everybody in that offense lacks a ceiling, really. Maybe most of them lack a floor without Ty God in that offense.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense there. Next one, speaking of not having a floor, the Cleveland Browns offense. We've seen them produce over the past couple weeks, as you mentioned here. Josh McCown was a guy you highlighted a couple weeks as, if nothing else, but it's strictly a volume play. And, he certainly paid off that in a huge way last week. But now facing off against, I think, the best defense in all of football, they don't really have it. It's still one of those situations where Josh McCown playing well, but he still doesn't have weapons, is what the craziest thing is. So, he's playing really well, and Gary Barnidge has had the most receptions of any tight end over the last 3 weeks. But, really outside of that, there's really just nothing to like, and I'm still on the Broncos defense. How about you?
Yeah, McCown goes from facing the worst secondary in the league in Baltimore to the best secondary, not only of this season, but for me of recent memory in Denver. So I know it's a home game. The Browns total is not hateful, 19.25 points. There's almost no possibility that they're going to have a game script that dictates running on the Cleveland side.
Yeah.
So McCown could pretty easily throw 40 times again in this one, but it's just a horrible matchup. And if I am going to have action on two guys for Cleveland, Gary Barnidge and Duke Johnson coming out of the backfield. That secondary for Denver is really tough. I think that if he's going to throw 40 times, a lot of those throws are going to go to Johnson in the flat, and they're going to go to Barnidge, within 10 yards of line of scrimmage. So I will have some exposure to Cleveland, but it won't be McCown.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense there. And then on the Denver side, maybe it's the end of the Peyton Manning era. Maybe it's just his struggles over the past couple weeks. Everyone's got a different opinion on here. And, he still has great weapons. A lot of the issue has been the running game, which has been awful. The numbers there are even kind of skewed by that one long run by Ronnie Hillman. They've got so many talented guys, but none of them have emerged. Now you got Ronnie Hillman's got a tweaked hamstring, as you mentioned here, too. So Emmanuel Sanders has been the one guy in that offense that's actually been consistent each week. So are you looking at any of these guys as cash game plays, or is Denver just all GPP for you?
It's getting to that point, and it feels strange saying that because for 3 seasons now, Denver has been such a cash game well that we go to over and over again. But with Peyton playing the way he is, it's hard to have faith in anyone. And I guess if I have any Denver receiver this week and going forward, it's going to be much more Emmanuel Sanders than it is Demaryius Thomas. Cleveland has a terrible run defense, okay? They're just I talked about this in the article, you can see the numbers there, but they're being destroyed on the ground every single week. Yet I have no confidence in playing a Denver running back in this one, and I have no exposure to that backfield. And that's saying something because the Browns are such a target and have been a consistently good target for running backs. Last week, a lot of people had Forsett in their cash game lineups, and it paid off in a big way. So, but this week I just can't. I cannot with that Denver backfield.
Yeah, that state of affairs there is just. I'm with you there. It's baffling how bad it's been because normally, like you said, you see the Browns defense and you say, okay, who's the guy getting the most touches? We don't know who's getting the most touches, and you just have no faith because they've all been awful. So, unless they start putting Emmanuel Sanders in the backfield and letting him run, then I don't have any faith in them either.
Right.
The Lions and the Bears, and this one's interesting because you see the Lions as favorites, despite the fact that they've been awful this entire season. Granted, the Bears haven't been great, but they've been marginally improved at least over the past couple weeks with Jay Cutler's return. And obviously, Alshon Jeffrey's still not likely to play. I don't think I've seen anything official about him being out, but I just don't see any way that the Lions beat anyone right now. Am I crazy in thinking that?
Yeah, the Bears are bad, but the Lions are in total disarray. I don't get their defense is not great. Their offense stinks. amazingly stinks. So with a lot of talent on that side of the ball, so I don't get it. But I do think that there's some sneaky GPP potential in this one because both of these defenses are really bad. I talked about some of the numbers there. Bottom 7 in points allowed and bottom 5 in points allowed per play. So offenses are being really efficient in the way that they destroy these defenses. So I actually do have exposure to both Jay Cutler and Matthew Stafford. It's a risk, I know, but but in GPPs and tournaments, I think that this could go well over the 43 projected points.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Could definitely see plenty of offense. I mean, we talk about this most weeks about this Detroit secondary especially and how awful they are, and Darius Slay and his the paycheck he's earning for his production. So next up, the Jaguars and the Texans, and this one surprisingly might actually be pretty exciting here from a DFS standpoint.
Yeah.
And obviously got DeAndre Hopkins leading the league in targets and yards. I mean, he's having a ridiculously great season. Blake Bortles and Allen Hurns both questionable, but it seems like they're on the right side of questionable.
Yeah.
And I'm still a big Brian Hoyer fan, and to be completely honest, I've considered putting him in my cash games this week. So talk me off the ledge.
No, I don't want to talk you off the ledge. I was going to ask you to talk me off the ledge.
I guess we're in it together then, because he's tentatively slotted in there right now.
I mean, I think we're not going to see that insane volume that Houston is seeing on the passing side of things. I think they're averaging over 50 passes a game, which after 6 weeks, that's kind of incredible. Yeah. Or 5 weeks, that is amazing. But the presence of Arian Foster is fantastic for Hoyer. I mean, it keeps the defense on edge. It makes play action a viable strategy for a Texans offense struggling, a lot except for in garbage time. Yeah. And the best thing about Hoyer is that he absolutely force feeds DeAndre Hopkins. Ryan Mallett, threw it to him quite a bit, but no one throws it to Hopkins like Hoyer does. And that's a good thing. When a mediocre / bad sometimes quarterback knows where his bread is buttered, I like that. So I will have a lot of Hoyer this week.
Yeah, I'm completely on board with you there. And then looking on the other side, obviously Blake Bortles kind of the sexy cheap pick of the week, I guess you could say. I mean, we saw him last week, that huge performance, but he is dealing with an injury, and unfortunately, like you mentioned here, it's a shoulder injury, which is more concerning than, you see a different type of injury with a quarterback, you kind of can sweep it under the rug and take your shot, but with something with the shoulder, I mean, I'm hesitant as you are, so even if he goes, I think that I'll have probably no exposure to him and probably marginal exposure to the Jacksonville receivers.
Yeah, I'm not interested in Bortles with that sort of injury. I read a report where a team doctor said, well, he can play with it, and that's not encouraging on any level. I know Bortles has been pretty good this year, but I still think that Allen Hurns and Allen Robinson should be considered for cash and GPP this week because I guess the backup there would be Chad Henne, right?
Yeah.
And so is that a huge drop off? I mean, Henne, Henne force fed Justin Blackman when he was in the lineup, Cecil Short. So I think that Hurns and Robinson are still viable plays, especially because they're still cheap. I mean, Robinson is a top 10 fantasy receiver, and he's priced like a wide receiver 3.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, it's a nice cheap value there, and like you said, I mean, Henne not a great talent by any means, but he's a guy that he's still a volume passer. I mean, he's a guy that can get the ball to his receivers. So it'd be a different story if he didn't have weapons. But I mean, obviously, both these guys merging, and now Julius Thomas back should see more of a role than he saw last week. So
yeah, and just keep an eye on T.J. Yeldon. I don't recommend him as a play at his current price, but he's very questionable. I think he's listed as questionable, which is a 50-50 shot. But Denard Robinson is expected to be back from a knee injury he suffered early in the season, and I would be very interested in him. I think he's priced at the minimum right now. If Yeldon doesn't go.
Yeah, I mean, like if you were a DFS or any sort of fantasy player last year, I'm sure you saw Denard Robinson with some big time performances filling in once Tony Gerhart was a big disappointment. So he's certainly a viable option. So keep your eye on that. Next up, the Vikings and the Chiefs, and we've got Adrian Peterson, as you mentioned, with the Vikings defense. One of, if not your favorite, running back defense stack. And I mean, it's hard not to, because the Vikings realized the error of their ways after week 1 and realized you have one elite weapon on offense. Give him the ball, and he's been getting force fed. And I mean, really, game script aside, I mean, there haven't been many blowouts for them recently, but he seems like he's one of the few guys that's going to be a lock for 20-plus touches. And I mean, he's priced like it, of course, but Chiefs defense has not been good at all. No,
and this sets up to me as a potential slaughter, and in a potential slaughter, I want exposure to the running back and the defense doing the slaughtering. So, Peterson is clearly the focal point of that offense. The passing game hasn't done anything because they haven't really been asked to this season, and maybe Teddy Bridgewater's not even capable of keeping a team afloat when they fall behind. So, Peterson and the Vikings defense are all over my lineups this week. The Chiefs offer such a high floor because they're giving up so many sacks, and the loss of Jamal Charles will probably only exacerbate that. Losing your best weapon in the backfield is not a great prescription for saving your quarterback's life back there. So I do have a lot of Vikings defense.
Yeah, I mean, a guy like Charles can't just be replaced by even a tandem of running backs like you mentioned here with Charkandrick West. I think you said you consider him nearly a must play in cash games. I mean, and it's really hard to argue that because he's going to see volume through the passing game, like you mentioned, because it's a ton of short passing in this offense because they can't protect the quarterbacks. So you got to figure he's going to see probably 5 to 7 targets, and even if he doesn't produce on the ground, that gives you a nice floor.
Right, and depending on I talked about his value on various sites. For me, the most insane West value, Charkandrick West value, is on Yahoo Daily Fantasy. Check that out if you get a chance. Go to the lineup optimizer on Daily Fantasy Cafe, and he is all over. I mean, you can't get him out of the lineup on that Yahoo optimizer. So. You should have pretty good exposure to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And then next up, Jets and Washington, 40.5 point total. This one's not pretty, but I keep finding myself leaning towards Chris Ivory for cash games because he's another one of these guys that's a high floor type of guy that gets a ton of carries, and it's the Washington defense that looked really good on the ground until they came into, league MVP, I guess, Devontae Freeman, and he just gashed them. So maybe it's a product of the fact they hadn't really seen a volume rusher yet, or maybe they're just simply not that good on defense and the numbers are skewed. What's your take there?
Yeah, I mean, Washington's defense is allowing 4.4 yards per carry, which is not good. It ranks near the bottom of the league. So I think that Ivory is, pretty much a lock for 15 carries, and I think that's conservative. So I'm with you on Ivory. I just wanted to mention real quick Brandon Marshall. I know he's been a reliable cash game play. I see that again this week. Even though he's only gaining 9 yards per catch, which is not ideal, kind of predictable for an aging wide receiver with a quarterback, who's not exactly strong-armed.
Yeah.
But Pro Football Focus lists the most favorable and least favorable wide receiver cornerback matchups of the week, and Marshall has the second best matchup this week. He runs most of his routes from the slot. Washington's really weak there, so I can't at his price. It's hard to avoid him right now.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean his price has jumped a little bit, but I mean he has been really consistent. It's still not anywhere near the upper tier, and I mean he's really the focal point in that passing attack. I mean Decker's seen some targets, but I mean not near the volume that Marshall has though.
No.
All right, next up the Steelers and the Cardinals. This one 44 point total, and this Cardinals defense, it seems like in They have those huge performances almost like every other week, just like clockwork, where they score, multiple defensive touchdowns. They get a ton of sacks. And this one with Michael Vick is going to be interesting because, you could always go out there if you're Arizona, pretty stout front seven, and just try to shut down Le'Veon Bell and say, look, if Michael Vick wants to beat us, then go ahead and beat us. But what's your take on the Cardinals? I mean, are they GPP only defense option for you because of Le'Veon Bell?
I was on the Chargers defense last week pretty heavily, and I know that I think they only scored like 7 fantasy points, which was not great, but they missed one pick six and 2 other interceptions. That close. I know, that close only counts in grenades and horseshoes, but I still am targeting Michael Vick any way I can, and that includes paying up for the Arizona defense. Their road defense is not my favorite, but Vick is really inaccurate. I mean, the guy is his career percentage somewhere in my article. It's like 58 or 9%, which is very low for a completion percentage. So yeah, I will have the Cardinals defense, and the Cardinals offense is littered with cash game plays. There may be no safer play this week than Carson Palmer against a Pittsburgh defense that is their stats don't look as bad as they are. I think because they've faced a couple 2 really bad passing offenses, but when they faced legit passing attacks, they have been destroyed. As we saw last week with Phillip Rivers, eclipsing 300 yards and throwing for, I believe, 3 touchdowns. So, Palmer, I see Palmer's floor, honestly, is like 250 and 2 right
yeah.
this.
Yeah, I mean, last week he only needed to throw 16 passes to get 3 touchdowns against
Amazing, right?
against the Lions. So I mean, his efficiency is off the charts right now. One last take here from this one. Le'Veon Bell, is he a guy that you feel like you have to have in cash games, or is he a great cash game play that you're considering?
It's hard this week. Last week I think that it was kind of easy just to plug him in against that bad San Diego run defense, but this is a little different. He will and can be saved by the passing game. Even if, say, he only runs 12 times for 40 yards in this one, he could still catch 6 passes and do something with those, and he gets all the goal line work, as we've seen. He's so expensive though. I'm hedging a little bit, and on Bell this week. Usually I'm not, but this week I am.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I kind of was hoping last week they would utilize him more in the passing game than they did.
Yeah.
More likely he was used in the first 2 games after his suspension. But I'm kind of on the fence. That was a question for me and for everyone else, of course. But I had to get your take because I'm on the fence. It's obviously easy to plug him in. But.
I wish I had a solid take. Like, yes, definitely play Bell, but he is seeing 6.3 targets per game. That's significant.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to see that we're on the same page with that, though, definitely.
Yeah.
Next up, the Titans and the Dolphins. And Miami upgrade their defense in the offseason. Everyone thinks that this is going to be a contender, not only in the AFC East, but maybe in the AFC in general, and that has not been the case. Defense has been terrible. You mentioned here they're giving up 5.9 yards per play, which is 5th worst in all of football. And Marcus Mariota is a guy he's looked good. I mean, they had a lot of drives last week that stalled out, red zone, opposing territory. So many opportunities last week, didn't really pay it off. And then, of course, you get guys like Jordan Cameron going against the Titans' terrible defense against tight ends. So who are you looking at mostly in this one?
Yeah, Cameron's price has dropped so much from week 1, and rightfully so. It seems like all the Dolphins' tight end highlights have come from other tight ends on the team, including that, and I can't remember his name, but that backup tight end who seems to come in garbage time, which Miami faces a lot of these days. Yeah. Basically the overview of this game would look like this: teams are just running up and down the field against Miami. They're giving up almost 400 yards total yards per game. So I think that Mariota is sort of a safe play this week, but I'm not saying anything beyond that for the Titans offense because I want Kendall Wright to be a thing, but he's not right now. He's only seeing less than 13% of the team's targets, which is just simply not wide receiver 1 type of market share as far as targets go. So I think that Mariota is the only guy that I'm interested in on the Titans side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, in your article you put it very well. You said Kendall Wright would be a logical stacking option with Mariota if he were a part of the Titans offense. So far he's not. So going back to exactly what you just said, I mean, I'm kind of surprised by the fact he's not a bigger part, but
Yeah.
I mean it's an easy avoid I think this week because I want guys that are going to get 10 or 15 targets like DeAndre Hopkins. So next up, the Seahawks and the Panthers, just a 41-point total in this one. Seahawks about a touchdown favorite, which is interesting because we do have the Panthers as undefeated. We've got Luke Kuechly, looks like he's likely to come back this week, which is a big boost to their defense. Marshawn Lynch, the Thomas Rawls Marshawn Lynch situation is going to be an interesting one again. But then you got to look at Greg Olsen because Seattle, yes, their defense is still a good defense, but Cam Chancellor especially, this defense has been getting gashed by tight ends.
Yeah, they've given up 4 touchdowns in 5 games to tight ends. They've given up some long pass plays to tight ends, and Olsen rightfully is the main red zone target for Carolina. In the rare occasion that Cam Newton doesn't run the ball in the red zone, so Olsen is a good play, and I think that he's a guy who won't have much ownership this week, along with Newton. And I'm not a big Cam guy fantasy wise at all, but when he's running it almost 11 times per game, which is that's like back to his glory days in fantasy. That's something we just didn't see last year, or really the year before. So as long as he's running it that much, I think this week probably more of a tournament play. But he's a good pivot away from similarly priced quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, he's got a really, really high floor there because if there's other reason than just those rushing attempts, and it's going to be tough for the Seattle defense stopping a mobile quarterback and Greg Olsen. They don't really worry about their options so much. None of those are really guys I'll be targeting anyway. What about on the Seahawks side? Are you playing any of these guys?
It's hard. The Carolina secondary is for real, and that Seattle passing game has disappeared really when it's faced tough competition this year, and really dating back to most of last year. So I think that if you're playing Russell Wilson, you're sort of hoping for one of his 100-yard rushing games, and that's just very, very tough to bank on, and something I advise not to bank on. So I don't think that I'm going to have much exposure to Seahawks this week. Marshawn Lynch is expected. I saw a quote from a Seattle coach saying he will play, quote, a lot, which maybe he's over his injury and his price has dropped, so that makes him a little bit appealing to me. But I would have to read up a little more on exactly how healthy he is, going into this matchup.
Yeah, and you got to expect with Thomas Rawls having success, I mean, he's going to be spelling him at some point, you got to imagine. So, unless I know that Marshawn Lynch is going to be, 20 touches, then although that price is tempting. So that's another one of those tough situations. Here's an exciting one, though. Packers and Chargers, 50.5-point total. Packers with a total of over 30 points here. And there's a whole lot to like here in this game. You got Antonio Gates had his return from his suspension. All he did was catch 2 touchdown passes on nine catches, almost 100 yards. Had a great return there. And then you've got this Packers offense, which has still been efficient, but has been driving people crazy because you get Randall Cobb, hasn't been producing where we'd like him to. Ty Montgomery catching touchdown passes. Eddie Lacy's struggling. But I think that Eddie Lacy, this is like the ideal matchup for Eddie Lacy, I think.
Yeah, if Lacy doesn't take advantage of this, then there's serious problems with him and the Green Bay running game. The Chargers are just being gashed weekly on the ground, like I mentioned a little earlier. So Lacy is a cash game option in a game that I think will be very high scoring. So the 2 Packers that I have most are Lacy, who will have high ownership, but also James Jones, who is $1,500 cheaper than Cobb on DraftKings. And I mentioned those Pro Football Focus matchup grades for this week, and he has what is listed as the number 1 wide receiver cornerback matchup. His red zone targets are healthy. So I have a lot of James Jones. I'm pretty psyched for James Jones this week, to be honest. He's in tournament and cash games for me.
Yeah, he doesn't even need a lot to produce because, like you mentioned in your article there, red zone targets and then in and of themselves are huge, and he's been seeing a ton of them with this team again, like he did last time he was with the Packers. So Next up, we've got the 49ers and the Ravens, and this one we've got a matchup of two terrible secondaries, and I'm personally really excited to play Steve Smith if he plays.
Yeah.
We know the story with him before. He's dealt through injuries, one of the tougher players in the league. So if he suits up and we hear he's not limited in any way, then he's a guy at his current price tag. He's only 6,700 on FanDuel. I would love his volume against this secondary this week.
Yeah, I'm with you. You know, I talked about Kamar Aiken a little bit as a guy that I want if Smith is out, but I mean, Smith is. We talked about force feeding DeAndre Hopkins. I guess the second most severe case of force feeding would be Steve Smith in that offense without without many pass catching options. Colin Kaepernick is being discussed as a cash game play in this one, and I think that makes some sense. I think that there are a lot of cash game options this week, enough so that I don't think that he jumps out as a great play. But it's the Ravens secondary is really quite bad. I mentioned in the article, Derek Carr, Andy Dalton, and Josh McCown have combined for 91 fantasy points against this Ravens secondary. That's not exactly what we think of a murderer's row of quarterbacks. Kaepernick has been the butt of a lot of jokes in fantasy and real football. But he has like 15 more fantasy points than Peyton Manning. Just putting it out there.
Wow.
He's not the total disaster that I think he's painted out to be sometimes.
Yeah, and I mean, if you watched that game last week against the Giants, I mean, he looked good. I mean, he didn't look spectacular, but he looked like a cash game play. He looked adequate, like a guy that's good enough to get you the points you need at his salary to pay that off. So you mentioned here Anquan Bolden also, and he's a guy that's a tempting option, in a lot of formats because not quite to the extent of Steve Smith, but he's a guy that Kaepernick looks to a lot. And I mean, we know, he's a great possession receiver, not much of a downfield threat at this stage of his career, but a guy that should see a lot of targets against this bad secondary, though.
Yeah, he runs 55% of his routes from the slot, which is where a lot of receivers have done really well against Baltimore this year. So I think that if he gets that same percentage or even more, hopefully from the slot, I think that he could have kind of a quintessential Bolden game, like 8 catches, 80 yards, and a touchdown.
Yeah. That sounds about right. One question I want to ask you here, it's kind of a comparison one. Let's say we assume Justin Forsett is out. He hasn't been practicing. He's questionable. Assuming he's out, do you play Buck Allen or do you play Charkandrick West in cash games?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually would go with Allen there, honestly. I mean, Allen has let's see, he's averaged 4.8 yards per carry on 26 carries. I know that's not exactly a huge sample, but I think that Allen is probably a better fit for this offense than Forsett. So I would shift away from West in that situation.
All right, I know that's going to be a popular question for people if that situation does arise, and it looks like it definitely might. Next one going to be exciting for so many reasons. You get your narrative game. You get Tom Brady versus Andrew Luck, likely an Andrew Luck's return, it looks like. So 55-point total tells you everything you really need to know about this one. And take your pick of Patriots. You got Gronkowski, Edelman, Deion Lewis, Tom Brady. I mean, whoever you want. Get as many Patriots as you want. And on the Colts side, though, are you a Moncrief believer this week with T.Y. Hilton? You know the Bill Belichick thing. He likes to take away the best weapon, and that would be T.Y. Hilton.
I think that it's probably harder to take away Moncrief than it is Hilton, just because of his size, the size difference between the two. I like Moncrief in this game. There's just no way that this game is going to have an even game script, or at least if it's even, I think that it'll be fast paced and high scoring. And that feeds right into Moncrief, who, because he's been quiet lately with Andrew Luck out and the Colts not really scoring a ton of points, his price tag is low. It's very, just do yourself a favor, just scroll down and see the receivers who are priced above Moncrief, and then remember what he was doing when Luck was in the lineup, which he is expected to play against the Patriots. So I am on board Moncrief this week.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, I mean, it's a big total for a reason, and I'm still not even a believer this game stays this close. I hope it does, just because I'll have plenty of Patriots exposure, and I want people not named LeGarrette Blount to get points in the second half.
Right.
But I just don't see it. I think the Patriots are going to smash them.
Yeah, I do too.
All right. Next up, Monday night game, final game of the week. Eagles and Giants. A decent point total here for a Monday night game for once. And is it time to go back to the Sam Bradford well in cash games? Because I know some people were back on him last week. Everyone was angry at first because he struggled out of the gate again, like he seemingly always does, and then once again turned in a solid performance.
I have to say, just before I get to Bradford, the status of Odell Beckham Jr. is significant here. He didn't practice again on Friday. That's telling. I think I heard that if they played on Sunday, he probably would not play. His absence, I think, changes the potential game script and the way that both teams approach this game. And I think it negatively affects offensive production on both sides. But if he plays, I think the Bradford is a real option here. We talked about how, you don't want a quarterback in your lineup who refuses to throw it beyond the first down sticks, but he has been. He has been. And while that's not been good for Jordan Matthews, it's been good for Sam Bradford. So he's taking shots downfield, and that's something that you just need. You need to see that. That needs to be part of his repertoire, and now it is. The Giants' secondary is nothing special, and the Giants have shut down the run for the most part. So we could get volume back on Bradford's side this week.
Yeah, I'm with you there, and that's a really good point about Beckham. I saw that stat this morning as well, and it's definitely concerning for anyone that wants to play him. I mean, I can't imagine I'll have any exposure. It's certainly going to take Eli Manning out of all my tournament lineups as well because, I mean, without him, Ruben Randall banged up as well. I mean, I know Eli does a great job. I mean, as good as almost any quarterback at spraying the ball around. But, I mean, if you just don't have anyone to throw the ball to, maybe they have to give Preston Parker a call and bring him back after he I mean, I don't know what they're going to do if they end up missing Beckham and Randall. Eli's going to throw it to himself.
They tried out Terrell Pryor. You never know.
Oh, man. Yeah, that'll be a fun Monday night for us, sweating out $1 million top prize with Terrell Pryor on
Terrell Pryor. Yeah, I'm into it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. So I imagine something's going to change if we find out he's not going to play for sure. You almost anticipate they'll sign someone, but
yeah, and Larry Donnell. I think I just want to mention him real quick. Still very, very low price because of the price locks from last Monday. No, they played Sunday night. But his price didn't move that much. That's what it was. His price didn't move that much, and without Ruben Randall, maybe without OBJ, the ball's got to go somewhere. So I sort of like to just throw him in as a punt play at tight end.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, he could have just been the default volume guy there for the Giants on Monday night there. All right, that's going to wrap things up for us for Week 6. Good luck this week. Check us out on Twitter at DFCafe. He's at CDCarter13. And check out the rest of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.